Still working? Good morning, good day, and good evening. Welcome to episode 206 of Tech of a Tea. I'm, as always, your host, Brody Robertson, and today we have a returning guest. I don't know how many times you've been on at this point. It's got to be at least 3, I reckon.
I think this is the third one. It's become an annual tradition. Usually in January. I think all of them have been in January. December or January.
Maybe they have been. Huh. Anyway, welcome back to the show, Matt from the Linux Cast. How are you doing?
I'm excellent.
Well, it's gone a lot better than it did.
So I'm good.
It's gone a lot better than it did last week. Oh my God, I don't know what happened last week. Do you have any idea?
So there was so we live in Michigan, and we got a butt ton of snow and ice.
Right.
And the minute we started the podcast, apparently the entire state of Michigan went down in terms of the ISP that I use.
Oh.
And it was down for about 24 hours. It couldn't have waited a couple hours. No. But, so, yeah.
Okay. Sure. Well, I hope the snow's gone now.
Well, the snow's still out there, but we haven't got any more, which is good. So.
Okay. So, probably not gonna shut down everything again, unless you have this sudden storm that rolls in that no one knew about.
Yeah, random. It's Michigan in winter.
Yeah, look, Australia, we get fires sometimes, and those are pretty bad. I don't think we didn't have one last year, at least one in my state last year. There were some up north, so that was obviously bad, but I didn't have to experience it myself this time. Last time there was a big fire, it was probably about 20 minutes away from where I lived, so that was good. That was real nice.
I'd much rather have a foot of snow outside than fires, so yeah.
Yeah, you can kind of work around snow, snow plows and all that. Fires, yeah, when you got a forest fire like that going, there's not much you can do about it. That's something you've got to just get away from and let the professionals deal with it.
Brody, honest to God, there is no amount of money in the entire world that could get me to move to Australia. And it's not the fires. It's not that you guys don't have cute, cuddly koala bears around there somewhere.
They have chlamydia.
It's the fucking spiders. So those people, there are people in my Discord who will troll me every once in a while because they know I hate spiders with pictures of spiders from Australia. No thanks. One of those comes in my house, I'm leaving the house and never coming back. You'll never see my anywhere near the house again. No, I will live in Siberia before I live there. I'm sure it's a lovely place. Just it's lovely for you.
yeah, Euston. There's a big, I don't know what it is, some dangerous looking spider. It's just chilling under my housemate's car because he's got an old car that he didn't sold. So it's been sitting there for 6 months at this point. So the spiders have all turned it into their home. There's probably, I don't know, a good 20 or 30 under there. It is what it is. It's fine. There was a spider that crawled across the dinner table the other day. I was like, it's fine. It's not going to hurt you. It's just a spider. What's it going to do to you? Bite you? Just bite it back.
That's Australia for you.
Look, if it's a big one, you hit it with a shoe, but actually here's an experience that you would hate. There was one time I killed a spider and it had a egg sac on it. So you hit it and hundreds of little spiders went everywhere.
Nope.
No.
Literally, I mean, you could offer me $1 billion and I'm like, no thanks.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
No more money.
You can just call you can get your house a pest spray, and they do things around the outside to make sure things don't come in. But every so often you're still gonna have something that shows up, and you just deal with it. It's fine.
I mean, no.
You'd be surprised how many people live in Australia that actually are afraid of spiders. I don't know how they do it. I don't get it. My sister's absolutely terrified of spiders, but I think it's because when we were young, we were driving somewhere. Just a long highway, 5-hour, 6-hour drive, just dead straight road, and there was a big spider on the ceiling of the car, just chilling there. and no one realized it was there for however long it was there. And yeah, that was fun when that happened.
I'd be walking the rest of the way.
Well,
I'm not getting back in the car.
if you want to see a spider in pain, I have another one where we were on another long drive, and I guess a spider climbed into the wheel, like the wheel of the car, and was just hung on for dear life, probably for a good 200 kilometers, and was just spinning over and over and over again. It had to have gotten there beforehand, because there's no other way it could have gotten there. So that spider wasn't very happy, and I think it was very dead by the time we stopped again.
Oh, that's a good spider.
It's a good spider. Anyway, we didn't drag you on here to talk about spiders. You're on here to talk about Linux, and more specifically Xorg and Wayland. To my surprise, you mentioned that you're actually trying out Wayland. You're actually trying out Hyperland.
Okay, so I have a FOMO moment going on because I
Okay.
see all these people messing around with Hyperland and
Me, I am the people.
yes, you keep making videos and teasing me with all this cool stuff, and it's very rude. Can't you make an Xorg video every once in a while, Brody? Go back to awesome when we all liked you, okay?
I do have a video that I'm planning to do about like choosing a window manager. I'm going to include both the X11 and Wayland stuff. But no, I'm pretty happy on Hyperland. There's one bug I have right now, but we'll get into that a bit later. Go on with what you were saying.
Okay, so seeing all your videos, and like everybody in my Discord uses Hyperland or some kind of Wayland compositor, and I'm like, you want? So I've tried Wayland in the past. I've tried all of the Wayland compositor. I've tried GNOME and KDE Wayland, and I always had problems. So obviously, the weird thing is that Wayland's been around forever at this point. But when I started trying it first, like 2 years ago or so, it was basically unusable at that point because there wasn't very many applications that would work, and Wayland was still basically in its infancy. So that was what I complained about then. And over that period of time, my complaints have just kind of transformed with it as it's gotten better, because it does move very fast, right? So obviously, being a content creator, my biggest issue has always been, recording videos on Wayland, because screen capture is, or at least was, not good. I mean, you could get it to work 50% of the time, and that was always a workaround. It felt very hacky for a long time. Like, something's hacky when the first step is put this environment variable into your .profile or your .bashrc or whatever. That's not a good experience for anybody, even a nerd. You don't want to have to do that to do something, especially when you're going to be moving back and forth between Xorg and Wayland. You don't want to have to deal with the environment variables to do that. So there was that period of time, and then eventually that got solved, but only very recently has it been a very seamless experience, like within the last few months. And when I say seamless experience, I still mean kind of buggy, but better.
Right.
So I tried it again probably 3 months ago. I tried to live on GNOME for a while. That was not a good experience. And that has by the way, absolutely nothing to do with Wayland.
I was going to say, is that a GNOME problem or is that a Wayland problem?
GNOME is so just not for me. I always say GNOME is so bad, but GNOME is not bad. It's just absolutely 100% not for me, but that's beside the point. But it got me into actually using the Wayland session of it, because when you download GNOME on OpenSUSE, which is what I've been on for a while, you only get the Wayland session of GNOME unless you use a specific version. Now you can if you install, and that's only if you install it after the install. If you install it from YAST, you only get the Wayland version. And so I was using that for a while, and the video thing started to work, and I was like, it's time for me to look at a compositor again. And for the last 3 months, my biggest downside for it has been the fact that I could not get my monitors to go to sleep. So my computer's on all the time, because it's a file server, and it backs up all the computers in the house overnight. And so I need the monitors to go to sleep. Like I like it to be automatic. I don't have to find the button wherever the button's at. I don't even know where the button's at. So the monitors would turn off and turn right back on, and that's been my problem for months. Now that's not just a Hyperland problem. That was a problem that I experienced on KDE, on GNOME, on Hyperland, on River. Haven't done all of them. And sometimes on Xorg, so it wasn't even really a Wayland problem. So I don't even know what's going on there. It wasn't until exactly today that I got it fixed. So it was literally like an hour ago where I found a workaround for it. So whether or not Wayland will be good for me this time, I don't know. I will say that the biggest reason why I keep coming back to Hyperland is because it's cool. I mean, you look at it, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. There's a reason why it's it's at least going by GitHub stars, the most popular Wayland compositor right now.
Yeah, if only there were more.
Yeah.
If only there were more.
Yeah,
I think that's my biggest issue right now is that I wish there was more choice. Because if you don't want to use Hyperland, Sway, kinda, but does anybody actually still use Sway?
Sway is popular, right? But the problem I have with core WL Roots compositors is I need to have window capture. And a lot of people like doing window capture with, things like Discord and all that. And with the WL Roots portal, it, for like 3 years now, hasn't been able to do individual window capture. You can capture the entire screen. You can capture your entire desktop. But you can't capture individual windows. And that's one of the big things that needs to be resolved, and I don't know what the issue blocking it is. I've not properly read through the entire discussion. I need to do that at some point. Maybe I'll do it later on. Besides that, though, I think Sway is about as good as i3. Obviously, keeping in mind the rough edges that exist right now with Wayland. But Hyperland, I think, is the most exciting. Having those animations, having the Hyperland plugin system, all of this stuff. And there's also just a lot of community excitement around just doing things with Hyperland, making it look really cool. It's an easy place to get into if you just want to mess around.
Then the head developer there is just so reactive to literally everything. You have a feature you want, like someone mentioned, could you get the workspaces to work like Xmonad? 3 days later, there's a patch in there for the next version to get it to work like Xmonad.
What does Xmonad do differently? I've not used that one.
Okay, so you've used Qtile. Have you used Qtile?
Not extensively. Not enough to have a good opinion.
So if you have multiple monitors and you have your set of 9 workspaces, basically what it is that if you have workspace 1 here and workspace 2 there, and you switch and workspace 1 is the active one, and you want to go to workspace 2, it'll switch workspace 2 to the focus monitor. And it'll swap them. Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool.
You can kind of get it Hyperland to do that now, but you have to do some really wonky key binding stuff. But the dev has basically put it in for the next version whenever that comes out. Now I won't get it right away because I'm on OpenSUSE, but eventually I'll get that, and that'll be awesome because that's really the only thing in terms of functionality wise that Hyperland for me is missing, because it doesn't do workspaces quite the way that I like it to be done. Also, we should talk about the bar situation because I hate Waybar with a passion.
Okay. There are a couple of other bars that exist, but Waybars, once again, this goes back to what you're saying where there's not that many options. Waybar is probably the most extensively developed option.
So here's a confusing thing. If you look at the Waybar version numbers, they did something really weird. Version 0.9.5 was when they decided to implement a way to restart Waybar out of the box with just like a command.
Right.
And the thing is that you see that 0.9.5 and you're like, okay. But then you look at the version you have, it's 0.9.24. Like, oh man, I'm really far behind.
No, yeah, I'm seeing it.
0.9.24 is the brand new one. 0.9.5 was like 2 years ago. The way they counted it was 0.9.9, and then they went to 0.9.10, and then 0.11, 0.12.
Sure.
So it was just counted
it's doing incremental counting. It's not treating it like a lot of things do, where they're just
Yeah,
yeah. Okay,
yeah, I
I see
didn't
what
go
you
to
mean.
version 0.10, which is, I guess, I mean, I understand. It was just very confusing because, when you use especially when you're looking at getting a package from, in my case, I got it from the Open Build service.
Mhm,
It would, you look at the version numbers, like, man, that looks like it's really far behind because
mhm.
it's 2.24 is less than point 0.5 in any metric
Right,
that you
right, right, right,
count
right.
with. It was just very confusing. But my biggest issue is more of a me thing. Is that my CSS is very, very rusty. I haven't done any CSS in probably 15 years,
Mhm.
and I'm not so sure I want to learn it again because have very poor memory from college learning CSS, and it's just not. And not only that, but it has changed so much in those 15 years. I don't know if any of my knowledge is transferable from back in college. Um,
Right.
and I'd be very worried about, like, I'm going to ruin something many times while I'm trying to, change this bar. That's why I've been trolling Unix porn to see if can't find a bar that somebody else has done that I can just steal, basically.
Yeah, my CSS is very simple. Like if you see my videos, you see my bar. It's a black bar with some blue outlines and some gray when I like highlight something. That's pretty much it. I know that you can do some crazy things with Waybar. It's just not something that particularly interests me.
Yeah, you're
Um,
not much of a racer.
well, I am. I just have a very simple setup that I do for every single thing. I don't like to, you have these people that have these like split bars with like rounded corners and like uh borders around the edges, and then like all this other crazy, like that's just not my thing. I've just never really been into that. I like my very like minimal layout I have, and it works, and I never touch it.
See, okay, so I'm exactly the opposite. I
Mhm.
have a collection of probably 15 or 16 different color schemes. I'll switch between them 3 or 4 times a day, or at least I usually do. I've actually been challenged by one of the guys in my Discord to use the same color scheme for a year.
Mhm.
It's been torture. I, I know it sounds real. Every time I say that, like, man, you have really first world problems, but see, the thing is, I work in front of my computer all day long
Mhm.
with my main job, and the best way for me to keep things fresh is to change color schemes from time to time because it just makes things look a little bit different.
Mhm.
Using the same layout and the same color scheme has been very hard for me because it just makes everything seem so boring.
Right.
I read history. I basically read history papers for a living. That's what I do. And some of the, I mean, I really probably shouldn't say this, but some of the people who write for the company that I work for aren't particularly good writers.
Mhm.
So, so spicing things up, Linux wise has been my way of coping with that. And I haven't had that for a while. So, my biggest worry right now, now that I gotten the monitor thing set up on Wayland,
Mhm.
is the bar situation.
Mhm.
And I will look into those other bars because I'm not particularly happy with Waybar as it is right now. I think that the problem is with Xorg is that the writing is on the wall and has been forever. Like
Yep.
BSPWM, for example, is one of my favorite window managers. You used to use BSPWM forever. There is no chance in hell that BSPWM is ever going to Wayland. It's just never going to Wayland. It hasn't even had an
Yeah.
Xorg update in 2 years or 3 years, probably now at this point.
BSPWM is like a functionally complete project, and when that happened, yeah, it's has it have there been commits to it? There's a commit 5 months ago, but yeah, there's
That actually surprised me because there was quite a big long gap there between commits for quite a while. But I would bet
yeah.
money.
So November. Sorry, I cut you off.
That's
November
fine.
2022 to March 25th, there was a 5 month gap. Then there was a couple of commits in April. Then there were commits in August, and there's been nothing since then.
But it's I only surprised me that there's been that many because
Mhm.
I mean you're right,
It's like
it's been
7.
complete, but you just know that there's never going to be a BSPWM version that's going to work on Wayland, right? It's just
Yeah,
never going to happen, probably.
yeah.
Xmonads say they're going to hire somebody to do Wayland for them. I wish them all the luck in the world. I would be surprised if we see that anytime very soon.
Hmm.
That thing is gonna take years to come if it ever does come. Qtile is doing its thing, and functional, but also it's Qtile. And while it's my favorite window manager of all time, Qtile is fantastic, but it's written in Python, and Python changes a lot. Every time they change something in anything, it breaks. Like, you're almost certainly going to discover if you use Qtile for any amount of time, it's just going to break sometimes, and that's just something you live with if you use Qtile. At the moment right now, I'm in one of those breaking periods where I can't use Qtile on OpenSUSE. It just doesn't work.
Right.
It crashes all the time. And the Wayland version is actually worse because it's still fairly new. And then, I mean, can you just imagine the suckless guys saying, well, we're going to do Wayland? It's just
that's the funny thing. I actually could imagine them doing that. Like, I could imagine them like making the most minimal of minimal Wayland compositors. It has no features. You gotta like compile in every basic thing. It is basically unusable. But
well, I mean,
it wouldn't be based on WL roots, that's for sure.
Yeah, because WL roots is not anywhere near suckless.
Yeah,
like. It's not it's not at all. So it had to be something that they did from, basically from scratch. And I don't know, it just feels something like it's more likely what they would do is just basically start over and call it something different. I mean, and the weird thing, I mean, DWL exists, but none of the patches that DWM has work with DWL, which seems like a missed opportunity.
That's the problem I have with DWL. That's when it's called like DWM for Wayland, like, yes, it is, and yes, there are new patches, but the thing that's great about DWM is that like long list of patches they have that have been developed over years and years, and I'm sure DWL can get to that, and it's a lot better than it was early on, but just like the core patches that people want are there for sure. But if you just look at that full list on the DWM website, there's a lot of things that are still missing. I have hope for it though, because it does seem like a fairly popular option in that sort of space.
And they seem to be fairly responsive to people who say, "Well, I need this patch. Can I get it?" And a lot of times, within a certain period of time, it does show up eventually. Someone will take that period on. But and I understand, like, if you go through the list of DWM patches, probably 80% of those rely 100% on Xorg tools, like Xdo tool or stuff like that to move windows around, and almost all that stuff has interaction stuff that it would either absolutely necessitate heavy portal usage or just wouldn't be possible because of the way Wayland is constructed, right? Yeah. So I understand, but in my mind, I think, well, you know what? This is supposed to be DWM. It feels like a big missed opportunity to take this. It would be basically like if somebody forked GNOME, but completely made every GNOME extension inaccessible. Because you're basically taking all that work out, and it's a missed opportunity. But like I said, I understand it. And then there's things like River, which is never going to be all that popular. There's a couple other ones, but it just feels like the traditional window managers that we've been using for the last few years either do have a Wayland plan, which is just basically 2 or 3 of them, or they're just going to live on Xorg until they die.
Yeah.
And that writing on the wall is what is finally getting me to look at Wayland, because I need a plan for when, like X1N is not going to just stop working next week. They're going to keep, developing it. But if they're really going to put a lot of their effort into the Wayland version, eventually that development work is going to go there and not on the Xorg version. It's a hard decision for someone like me, who somehow I became the grumpy old man of the Linux community. I don't know how this happened. I'm not even 40 yet, but I don't like change, and it felt to me that they moved to Wayland too fast for people like me. For people who like change, I absolutely love the move to Wayland. But every time I've tried Hyperland or one of the Wayland things, I spend basically the entire time I'm switching to it changing every little bit of my workflow. I have to change different applications. Like at one point, you couldn't use the same terminals because like Kitty wouldn't work because it wasn't ready. It will work now, but wouldn't work then. Alacrity wouldn't work for a little while there at the beginning. So you had to find a new terminal. You had to find a new app launcher. All this stuff. It was basically like switching from Windows to Linux because you had to find everything new. And that really bugged me. And that's still somewhat the case, even though a lot more Xorg stuff will work on Wayland than before, which is making the process much smoother than it was even 6 months ago.
I think when it comes to replacing apps, it also depends on what sort of apps you're using. Because if you're a big GTK user or you're a big Qt user, like if you have a GTK terminal, for example, there wasn't really ever an issue getting that working on Wayland, because since GTK 3, not sure which update, maybe right at the start, but GTK 3 has for a very long time supported Wayland. But if you're, I do get it, if you're using some like these weird terminals, some of them did play weirdly early on with Wayland. I never experienced those issues with Alacrity. ST, when I occasionally use that's always worked. I did have to replace D menu, sadly, which is very sad because I've had this D menu fork for a long, long time. I've patched it exactly the way I want it to be. I did find an application, or re-find an application that I used a while back called Toffee, which is like a super lightweight version, and it works great. The issue I had with D menu is sometimes it just didn't open on Wayland, or it would just open behind Windows, or it would open in the middle of my screen. It just was really, really inconsistent. Toffee interacts with, there's a protocol for app launchers to specify where they want to be, so that just works like it should. But I do get what you mean about things being rough for a very, very long time, because whilst Wayland has been in development for 15 years, I've said it before, but I think the first 12 or so years of Wayland development, a lot of that was focused on this, how would you say it, this perceived what's the word, this idealized goal of what a desktop could be. And it wasn't until 3 years ago that we started getting video capture being possible. Georgia Stavrakis didn't do that work until 2020. You could not capture Wayland with OBS until 2020. That's how new that feature is. And a lot of other things are only very recently being dealt with. Multi-window stuff is being discussed now. Screen tearing is really, really new. That was held back for so long, not just by GNOME guys, but Simon Sir, the WL Roots guy, wanted nothing to do with it for a really long time. And all of these other little things are now just coming together, but we're very much in this transitionary stage, so there is going to be a lot of rough edges, especially with portals. Portals you've experienced yourself a couple of months ago were kind of rough, and even now are still a little rough around the edges. It works probably 9 out of 10 times, but then you have this one time where you're like, why did this stop working? What's going on? And it's not just a portal thing, but there's a lot of things where most of the time it works, but then sometimes it doesn't. And that, I do agree that some distros are moving a bit too quick. I don't think you should be doing away with your X11 session right now. Fedora's going to do it because that's what Fedora's always done. They've always been, Fedora is not a new user-friendly distro. They're
Apple getting rid of the floppy disk.
Yeah.
Or FireWire.
Or the headphone jack.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly. Fedora would definitely do that.
Yeah.
Oh, you guys don't need mouse support anymore. We're moving on to whatever's next.
Yeah, so Fedora, they were the first distro that adopted System D. They were one of the first distros that adopted, that offered Wayland. I think the first one was Rebecca Black OS. But
that's hilarious.
Yeah. It refers to itself now as RBOS. It rebranded to be a a more general distro. But yes, originally it was a meme distro
As
like
an
Hannah
old guy,
Montana.
I have no clue who Rebecca Black is.
It doesn't matter.
None whatsoever.
It literally doesn't matter. But it was basically a meme distro like Hannah Montana Linux.
I thought they were the same person. Like, I don't know who that is. Like,
It
no
literally doesn't matter at all. But like distros like I can't speak for SUSE entirely, but they're not going to do away with X11. Like you might have I'm sure Xorg is still in the repos if you want to go and use that.
It is. Oh, there. Like I said, if you download from install from the ISO, GNOME from the ISO, you get both. If you download from Yast, you have to download the extra package in order to get it.
Right.
So they've basically what they've done is separate. They used to be a combined package. Now they're separated out, and I just downloaded the Wayland one. I could have easily gotten Xorg, but I decided to be edgy and just use the Wayland version, and then found out that GNOME is still just GNOME.
And Xorg, right? Even though Xorg like, even though with like the KDE version of Fedora and then the GNOME version of Fedora, that KDE is basically guaranteed. GNOME's still in discussion about doing away with the X11 session. Xorg's still going to be in the repos because they do have these other flavors, these other spins like Budgie, like XSCE. I believe Ubuntu has a Cinnamon version as well right now.
Yes, I think it's the same kid who does like all the spins.
Right.
Like 13 or whatever.
Yeah, I think he's got at least like 6 different distros he runs.
He's gonna be forever 12, by the way. Like
yeah,
he's gonna live at that age forever.
I have I've got him on Discord. I need to bring him on the podcast. I need to ask him what his actual age is because I've seen so many articles, like multiple years apart, refer to him as the same age. I don't know how old he is. I'm assuming he's got to be at least like 17 now. Surely.
Well, you would think so because it was hilarious. So when I first started my channel, I made a video on Ubuntu Web when it first came out. I was like, it had been out for days at that point, so it was very, very rough edges, and I was an asshole in that video. And then immediately afterwards, I learned somebody in the comments like, this kid's like 12, right? Like, oh god, I feel like such a douche. I haven't made a video on one of his spins again. I'm just too embarrassed about it.
No, I did a video on Unity X when that first came out. It was very buggy, and people did the exact same thing with me. You're like, this guy's a kid, right? It's like, okay, all right then, sure.
It feels way different, criticize something like this. We want obviously the younger generation to come into Linux, and then there's the old douchebags who make videos and criticize all their work, so they go back to Windows. It's not a great situation.
Yeah, but it is what it is. Oh, one thing you did mention, it was like 10 minutes ago at this point. You mentioned with a DWM fork that breaks all the patches, it's like someone forking GNOME and then it breaks all the plugins. You don't need to fork GNOME for that. You just need to update it. GNOME breaks all the plugins every update.
That's so true. And they do it. They absolutely. They say they don't do that on purpose. They say, oh, we're all for extensions. We even created this awesome extension manager. But first off, you absolutely do it on purpose because they all break every single update. But also, your extension manager was forked by someone else and actually made good, and you still refuse to put the good one inside of GNOME. Also, you don't ship it with GNOME at all. The distro is responsible for shipping the extension manager. So you're not pro extensions. In the perfect world, GNOME would absolutely have no extensions whatsoever. You would use GNOME the way they want you to use GNOME, and that's fine. The thing is, every time that I try GNOME or every time I talk about GNOME, there's always 10, 12 people that show up and say, I love the way the GNOME workflow works. It just makes 100% sense to me. And we're all very special snowflakes. We all do things differently, but I don't get the GNOME guys. That workflow just does not work for me. And I'm glad that it works for other people. But for me, if I'm going to use a desktop environment, it has to be, and I hate to say this, and I'm going to lose my Linux card, but it has to be Windows-like. It has to feel like a Linux thing where I can customize it. GNOME is too much like a lockdown piece of software for me, and it just bugs me. Even though if you troll Unix porn as much as I do, you can see people do amazing things with GNOME, and like, how did you do that? And how long is it going to last until they do an update? So GNOME is definitely not for me, but people really there's a reason why every distro chooses GNOME and not KDE. I mean, there's just absolutely a reason.
Well, it's a well curated experience, and for a lot of people, that experience is is really nice. And I get it. And a big part of the reason why they do ship GNOME is traditionally packaging KDE is just a nightmare. And then the release cycle of KDE is also terrible as well, where it's like you have the 3 major components that are all released at different times, at different cadences. So if you're a stable release like an Ubuntu, for example, it's kind of a mess just to package the things you actually want to package. Whereas GNOME, it's like, okay, we release 6 months on the dot every single time, and that's a lot easier for distros to just work with. If you're someone like if you're a distro like Arch, for example, and you're just shipping things whenever, or Tumbleweed, or something like that, Gentoo, it doesn't matter what the release cadence is. But especially if we're talking like Red Hat, for example, they want a strict release cycle that they can understand. And yeah, it just makes sense why it's so popular to actually be shipped. Plus, it's got the Red Hat support, so it's well developed.
And it's a set number of packages that hardly ever changes. Mm-hmm. They have a number of packages. They're all wonderfully maintained, and at least within the core GNOME stuff, right? Mm-hmm. You have obviously, if you go through, there's like a list of GNOME apps on their website. They have almost as many applications, their official GNOME apps, as KDE does. But mm-hmm. The core stuff, what they ship, is a very small amount of packages. If you look at that in comparison to the KDE dependencies, it's absolutely crazy. If you download just like one, even if you're not going to have Plasma on your machine and you download a Qt application, it's like downloading a Haskell application or anything written in Python. Mm-hmm. You're going to end up with a ton of libraries, a ton of all this nonsense. And a lot of distros now, I don't know if you've noticed this, but they've been doing this weird thing where they package together. Like if you were to download Thunar,
sure,
a lot of distros will actually package Cinnamon Desktop right with it. Like you have to download both unless you use the flag to ignore it. That's a lot of distros. That's on Fedora and on Ubuntu. Both do that.
Okay.
It's really weird. Not Cinnamon. Excuse me, I misspoke there. XFC.
Sure.
Thunar is XFC. It's Nemo that they do with the Cinnamon. They do it with both. It's really, really odd. Like you have to download both. Now you can choose to not do that. There's a flag or whatever that says ignore hard dependencies, ignore soft dependencies, I think was for like Arch or whatever. You can do that, and all of the package managers have something similar to that. But you download their file manager, you're also going to get the desktop environment usually that goes with it, and that's several different distros. I don't know for sure if Nautilus, if you did, for whatever fool reason you decided you were going to use Nautilus as your file manager on a non-GNOME thing, you can do that. I'm not sure if they bring GNOME along with it, but it wouldn't surprise me. But it seems, I don't know why they've begun to do that, but it's over the last year I've just noticed that. It's really, really weird. Yeah.
I can't say I've experienced that, but I do know what you mean about just pulling down a ton of dependencies. I use Kdenlive, obviously, and I've probably got half the KDE libraries installed because of it.
I can hear the app image guy in the background. Well, if you just use an app image, you could definitely, get past that situation.
I have actually considered using the app image or the Flatpak from time to time, simply because, I ran into, especially traditionally, Kdenlive was very hit and miss between releases. Like some releases would be great, others, I don't think they ran their test suite. And I had an issue a little while ago where I think it was actually a bug with MLT where it, for some reason, ignored one of the audio tracks. Yeah, it ignored the second audio track and then duplicated the first into the second. So there was just a regression that I guess nobody tested. They released a new version and then the problem was just gone. But things like that, like I think App Image is really cool. Like I genuinely do. And my hope is that they do stick around and look. As much as I like Flatpaks, I think Flatpaks are super cool, and app images are just neat. Though, like they offer a very Windows-like way of installing application. Like, you just grab a file and it's just the thing, which I know a lot of people don't like. Package manager and all that. And package managers are great, but I like the idea of these different ways of doing like application distribution. I don't think we just need to do package management because that is what we've traditionally done on Linux. I think adding these different things that people can mess around with if they want to is probably a good thing.
I agree.
Unless it's a snap.
Okay, I just switched to snaps to make a video about it. Like, I just posted that video a few days ago.
Oh, I didn't realize.
Snaps have gotten better, kind of, but you can tell. Excuse me. You can tell that Canonical has done a lot of work to make, because the biggest problem with snaps has always been they launch slow on cold boot, right?
Sure.
That's the problem. Obviously, you still have to deal with the loopback devices and all that, which bugs the crap out of me. It also bugs the crap out of me that they put a snap directory in your home directory and you can't move it unless you stop using snaps. Like, it won't go away. Those things bother me, but those are just pet peeves of mine. The actual problem for snaps was always because it was slow. It has gotten better, but in traditional Linux fashion, the fix that they came up with is not an obligatory fix. So you have some snaps that are open lickety-split, like really, really fast. You have some that haven't instituted the fix that are really, really slow still. Like,
is that the new compression algorithm they swapped to?
Yeah, they switched to a different compression algorithm. They've done a whole bunch of other magic stuff in the background. So now if you download the Firefox Snap, well, yeah, it's still slower than if you were running a native package. It's still, you open it up and 3 or 4 seconds later, it's open. Sure. It's really, it's not so slow as like, oh my God, this is slow. And then you open up something like, I have a to-do list application called Todoist that packages a Snap as well, and it takes 50 to 70 seconds to launch. Like, that's just, if I could go cook, get a coffee and come back and it not be launched yet, it's slow. Right. And that's just because they haven't done it. For whatever reason, they did not make that a mandatory thing. Like, if you don't use this compression algorithm, you don't get to be on the Snap Store. Mm-hmm. That's what they should have done. They didn't do it. And here's the thing is, I don't know this for sure. This is just my headcanon. What I believe to be the reason why they've done that is because they know if they did make it a requirement that they would lose a whole bunch of applications, and therefore they would not have the library to compete with Flatpak such it is. Because Flatpak already has a much larger selection of applications than Snap does. If they pushed a whole bunch of people out because they weren't updating their applications, they would lose even more. Mm-hmm. I have no clue if that's true at all. Could be just making that up, but that's what it feels like to me.
Because the one advantage that snaps do have over Flatpaks is that list of proprietary applications. They're not just proprietary applications that are on the store. First-party supported applications. You have first-party support from JetBrains and from a bunch of other companies that just doesn't exist on the Flatpak side.
Yeah, and I say what you want about snaps, but they do a ton of stuff way better than Flatpaks. In terms of package naming, updates, actually having just one package that you download and install. I mean, if you use Flatpaks and you download Kdenlive, you don't just get the Kdenlive Flatpaks. You also get the Mesa Flatpak. You also get the a locale pack. You like a language pack, and all of a sudden you went from having one Flatpak to having 4 Flatpaks, and then it's not as if that's fine that they all can use the same language pack. A lot of times you download another Flatpak, you're going to get another version of Mesa that it uses, and another version of a language pack that it uses. And I had like 12 Flatpaks at one time, and I didn't actually have that. I had 45 Flatpaks because of all these extra packages that went along with it. Snap doesn't do that. Now,
that's actually, before we get into that, that's not necessarily as bad as it might initially seem, because Flatpak does a thing called deduplication, where if you do have the same data, it basically flattens it down and just removes that from being a concern. So whilst you might have all of these flat packs, if you actually check how much data is actually being used, yes, it is certainly more than otherwise would be used, but it might not be as much as it initially seems.
Yeah, it was never really the data that ever got to me. It's like when you do flat pack lists in the terminal. Terminal nerd, you manage everything in the terminal, and you do flat pack lists, and you have a list of all the flat packs that you have. You don't know. It doesn't tell you that this version of Mesa goes with this flat pack,
Sure.
and you don't. It makes it really hard to uninstall stuff, and you have to use the -- unused, and it will basically do it for you. So it's not that big of a deal, but it's kind of the same thing with the loopback devices on snaps. That doesn't really hurt anything. It just bugs me.
Sure.
It just bugs me. So also, I don't know how we're this far into this whole package revolution thing, and Flatpak still can't do a theme to save its life. I mean, just at all. It just, how have we not fixed this yet? Like, we've been complaining about it for 6 years at this point, and you still can't just inherit the default GTK theme out of the box. I mean, all sorts of Flatpaks. I mean, the theory behind being able to manage all of your Flatpak permissions in an application is really cool, but it ceases to be as cool when you realize that the developer can decide what to turn on upon compilation. So basically, it can give access to your home directory. They don't have to ask you for that. They have access to it if they think that they need it. It's supposedly to give you this idea, kind of like Android, where you install an application on Android and it says, hey, this thing has access to this, this, and this. Would you like to have it continue to have access? Like, that's the theory behind it, right? But it's not. They haven't gone as strict as that, because the developers can give themselves access to whatever they want. But for whatever reason, none of them give themselves access to the .theme folder to have access to the GTK theme. Like, none of them. Like, how is this still? And I got to remember that not everybody cares about theming like I do, but sure. I really would just. It doesn't have to be. Did we have to choose Adwaita Light? I mean, nobody uses Adwaita Light theme. Like, they all use the dark theme. Just choose that one, and nobody would care.
But stop theming my app.
I know. Man, when that thing was first came out, people were freaking the hell out.
Yeah. No, I get what they were saying. It wasn't about users. It was about distros that were shipping broken ass themes. Because that is definitely a thing. And then it's not the distro that ends up having people come to them. It's the application developers, and they're like, get rid of your stupid theme. Like, what do you like? We can't do anything about fixing your broken theme. Like, I get it from their perspective, but as with a lot of things that I think come out of the GNOME side of the world, I think a lot of it is really badly communicated. How would I say it? It's framed in a way where it makes sense to the people that already agree with them, but they do a bad job at convincing people why they should also care, if that makes sense.
Well, and basically all developers do this, but they, exactly like what you said, they make a decision based on what's good for them as a developer, and that's absolutely 100% the way they should do it. But they also explain it as if everyone else is also a developer. And should care exactly the reason. Like when they pulled out the task tray icons from the bar, like, this has been ages ago, it freaked everyone out. Like, oh my god, how am I supposed to know if Dropbox is running in the background? And obviously what they wanted to do was, that was during the period, like, everything used to be Nautilus, like the entire shell used to run on Nautilus, and they were trying to decouple everything because GNOME was notoriously slow when it was like that. So they were pulling stuff out left, right, and center, and everybody was just losing their minds over everything that GNOME. I mean, it's so bad it's now become a meme. Like, oh, GNOME just removes features, and they don't do that nearly as much as anymore. They've started adding features again, but it's still something that they have a reputation for. And when they did that, they didn't explain it as in, like, good lord, we're trying to make this desktop environment actually functional, because everybody's complaining that it's the slowest desktop environment in the history of the world. and we need to fix that, and this is how we're choosing to do it. No, they were basically silent on the matter. Like, this is just the way we think it was supposed to be done, and if you don't like it, use KDE.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically. I mean, they obviously said it differently than that, but it's just that's what it felt like, and they do that constantly, where their PR, whoever runs their PR, is just not very good at running PR at all.
Well, this is
Go
on.
It's just Canonical has the same problem sometimes, where they make a choice, like when they cut 32-bit libraries, right? They made that decision for development reasons, but forgot to tell everybody the reasons why.
Yeah, this is one of the things I think KDE does really well. There are people like Nate Graham who write these blog posts that explain what is actually going on in the KDE world. Like, here's why we're doing this, here's what's going on, here's the issues we're going to have along the way. And there's not really anyone in the GNOME space that does that. At least to my knowledge. There might be somebody that does, and if somebody knows, please do let me know. But I don't know of anybody that writes blogs in the same fashion as Nate Graham. You have, like, the GNOME Weekly blog, which explains stuff in a fairly GNOME technical way, and it's not really explaining stuff, it's more about just taking quotes from individual developers and mentioning, like, it's basically like a changelog with extra steps. But
they do have that. No, they do it the opposite way around, is that they do the thing that's going to cause people to be upset with them, and then afterwards they'll send their people out on Mastodon and Twitter to yell at people for criticizing them. There's a couple people on Mastodon.
This is something I do definitely see. People can work out the names themselves. There is a couple of people in the GNOME, like, that are sort of like seen as like the face of GNOME, that are really, really bad at communicating. Like, every single conversation they get into, it very quickly devolves into, you're a moron, you have no idea what you're talking about, you're a terrible person. And then it'll be like, they won't even be replying to you anymore, they'll just go and have their own separate tweets where they're insulting just the whole concept of them possibly... Like, there's no possibility that I'm wrong. There's no possibility that, like, you know, what I'm saying is confusing. It's just, the masses are stupid. How don't you get this basic concept? It's not everyone. There are people like Cassidy. Like, Cassidy James is great at explaining stuff. And there are people who do, like, you know, different bits of dev work who are all great at explaining stuff. But those people who are seen as the face... I think there are some people that need to take a step away, look at the way they're communicating, and think about, why do people have this reputation that... why do people think that GNOME has this reputation of not caring what users want, of changing things, of being a really unfriendly community to get involved with? Because I think if they step away and look at the way they are acting, they'll realize very quickly why people have that why you guys have that reputation. And I think all you need to do is just look at the way that people like Cassidy communicates and basically just emulate that. Think about why people have an opinion. Ask them, like, okay, can you explain why you think this is the case? Can you expand upon this? Or is the person just trying to troll for the sake of it? And have this, like, friendly discussion about what's actually going on. I get it. You get trolled a lot of the time, and you get insulted, especially if there was some, like, big feature just removed, like, you know, some stuff changed with system trays or something like that. I get it. You're gonna get insulted a bunch, but insulting people back doesn't make people any more sympathetic to your cause, and is just going to make people hate you even more.
Yeah, and I mean, all you have to do is make one YouTube video about GNOME that has anything negative to say, and you hear from those people. And the thing is that I don't think GNOME is as bad nowadays at listening to community as they have the reputation to be. Like, like LibAdwaita is not theming support like we used to have, but it's way better than what we all thought we were going to get. I mean, when they said that they were going to pull, when GTK4 was first announced, and we all learned that there was going to be absolutely no theming support whatsoever, the hack was going away. we thought, well, that's the end of theming on GNOME, right? That's what we all thought. Multiple videos were made, many people were ranted and very, very upset about it, but they listened to that feedback enough to the point where they came up with a solution that not only I think is good, but worked well for them from a development standpoint. You can do quite a lot from a theming perspective on GNOME. Like, gradients exist. That's a GNOME application. It's there. You can use it. And well, yeah, it's not like we used to be, but it's still, like I said, way better than which we expected to have. And while it's absolutely true what I said earlier, what we both said earlier about the extensions things and always breaking, they could very well just say no more extensions, because that has to give them a ton of headaches every single version. Like, how are we going to get this thing to work? And yes, we're going to break things, and we're going to hear from every developer of an extension ever, and how they have to have a lot of development support behind those, even though they do break all the time. If it would be much easier for them if they were like we all think that they are, because of their reputation, to just say, you want what, that's it, no more extensions. They could do that. It'd obviously make everybody mad, but they could do it, but they don't do it. So here's me. I hate GNOME. I'm defending GNOME. What's wrong with me? It's just again, I bring it back to Canonical just a little bit, because Canonical has somewhat of the same reputation as a very closed organization in some places, and also making really poor decisions without explaining them well. Also, just making some poor decisions, even with good explanations. So, adding advertisements to the terminal commands, like that's just silly. I mean, no one's going to be like okay with that. Like, oh, I can see Ubuntu Pro advertisements every time I do an apt update. Great, that's exactly what I want from my terminal experience. Or adding the Amazon links to everywhere for multiple years. And eventually they got it right, but it took them a very long time. Canonical has that same situations where they every once in a while, they'll be going along really, really well. People thinking like, well, Ubuntu is really, really stable, I can recommend this thing, and then they'll make some really weird decision that just pisses people off, and all of a sudden, again, they go back to the reputation of not knowing what they're doing, or being closed off, and not listening to the community, what they want to say. And it's just, I think that this is a problem. When Microsoft makes a decision, you don't hear from the developers who do the work, right?
Sure.
You hear from a PR department, or you hear from the CEO or whatever.
Right.
In open source software, there's not really. I mean, yeah, you have CEOs in some of the bigger corporations, but you don't have huge. I mean, you don't have, especially with this kind of stuff, you don't have huge media PR departments. A lot of times, the developers are the PR department, and they're bad at it in a lot of situations. They're just not. They're good at C++ or C or Python or Rust. They're good at Rust. We know they're good at Rust, right? But they're not necessarily. They're probably not the most people person, so they don't have the the necessary experience to deal with a horde of entitled users who demand that everything works exactly the way they think it's supposed to work. And the thing is that I'm exactly 100% an entitled user. I am forefront wanting things to just to bring it all the way around. This is my problem with Wayland. I want it to work the way that I want it to work. Basically, what I want is X12. I want a perfect transition from what I was using to the thing that's new, and I would be happy. Xmonad goes right along with it. Qtile goes right along with it. I can use all of the stuff that I want to use exactly the way that I've always used it, and nothing has changed. And that's the way I want it. And then when I don't get it the way that I want it, I make videos about it on YouTube, bitching about how you're never going to get Xorg away from me. You're going to have to pry it out of my cold, dead fingers. I actually said that in a video, by the way. I think I actually used your face on that thumbnail.
You did. It was my GitHub profile picture. Ancient picture.
Well, see, the thing is, if you Google Brody Robertson, I'm pretty sure that's literally the only picture that's in Google Photos of you.
Surely not.
I think there's some from your videos, but I think it's like the only one that's like not moving or doesn't have other things on. I don't even remember. I used that one for some reason. Maybe it was the first one. But
It's
anyways,
definitely the first one. Yeah, I'll give you
yeah,
that.
it's like it's probably the first one. But that's just me. That's the way that I it's one of those behaviors like you know that you have flaws as a person and you realize that they're flaws,
Hmm.
but you're still that way even though you know that those are flaws. And that's my one of my flaws is that I know that I'm an entitled Linux user
Hmm.
and that come up with a lot of opinions that exhibit that flaw. Specifically lately, it's just been Wayland all the
Hmm.
time. Like I want my machine to work the way that I want it to work, and if it doesn't work that way, obviously you're doing something wrong because it was working just fine before. Why didn't you just fix Xorg? Why do we have to keep creating new things all the time? What was wrong with Pulse Audio? We were perfectly fine with Pulse Audio. We finally got audio to work on Linux for the most part, even though Pulse Audio was still a piece of hot freaking garbage. But why did we have to create something new? And also, is Pipewire supposed to be an audio stack for, a replacement for Pulse Audio, or does it have to do with video? Oh, it's both. Why is that confusing? I have I have a lot of issues with change,
Hmm.
and when things change out from underneath me, I get like this. I get very ranty all of a sudden, and you won't see. You should see it coming because it happens a lot. Because things change, and it just bugs me when they change. And I'm the grumpy old man of the Linux community. I don't know how I've gotten to this point. It's not great.
You mentioned X12 in there, and how it would be great if it was like it's a smooth transition. I'm sure you've seen the Xorg Foundation page on X12. Um, yeah. Okay. So for anyone who hasn't, there is a theoretical design possibility of what they would want X12 to be. And the fun thing you said there about it being like smooth transition, that I don't think would be the case. Traditionally, at least, with there were versions of X before X11. Like, there's a reason why it's 11. There were 10 versions prior to it. It's just they existed over the span of about 2 years. So the development up to X11 was very, very quick. And my understanding is X9 apps didn't work on X10, which didn't work on X11. It's hard to find anything earlier than that because you're talking 1980s, so there's not really any of the information that exists is paper logs.
Yeah, you'd have to go back to the library and get microfiche and stuff out of.
Yeah, yeah. I don't even know if the information's been digitized. Like you've got to probably go to like MIT's archives or something to find anything. But yeah, traditionally there actually was still that issue of things not being compatible. But at least you could at least say it wouldn't be as big of a divergence as we're seeing now. But you also mentioned Pipewire in there. So what is actually your thoughts on Pipewire?
I have resigned myself to use Pipewire because you can't not at
Mm-hmm.
this point. I mean, okay, so theoretically, if you install Vanilla Arch and you use Arch install, you get to choose between Pulse Audio and Pipewire. That's as far as I know. Actually, Gentoo is probably another distro where you could probably choose if you
Yeah,
because you
I don't
have
think
that.
Gentoo even does even it probably mentions an audio system in their install wiki, but I don't think there's any like unless you pull in something like pull in a package that has a dependency on one of them. I don't think it would even install
I'm
an audio system.
Well, no, I'm pretty sure that it defaults to Pipewire, and then if you want to use Pulse Audio, you have to use a use flag in order to get rid of that. I'm
Maybe
pretty sure.
it's been a while since I've done a Gentoo install.
Yeah. But anyways, I think those are the only two distros that even give you probably the choice. Like
Void
everything
probably.
else is, well, yeah, Void. Okay, I'm gonna piss off all the Void people. Nobody uses Void. Okay, all right. Dev1 gives you a name. Come on, man, I'm gonna piss everybody off. Everybody who's anti-system D is just gonna be like, man, what are you doing? My distro counts too. Equal representation. Anyways, the vast majority of real distros, I should.
Yep.
Uh,
Okay,
uh,
we're going
they
strong.
all use Pipewire out of the box, right? Every
Yep.
single one of them. You can't name a mainstream distro. There's the PC version of it that doesn't use Pipewire out of the box.
Mhm.
And I've come to the conclusion that if I'm going to use a Linux computer, I'm going to use Pipewire. And it's gotten easier because it actually works now.
Mhm.
I mean, it has. I got to find some wood again to knock on, but it has been a hot minute since pipeware has broken. But there was a period of time, like a year ago, maybe 2 years ago now, where literally every update, it broke pipeware, like
Yep.
every time.
Yep.
Like there were, like it didn't matter what they were. Like they could have literally changed one line of code, and then the entire stack would have went down.
Yep.
And it was always this. There was a period. There was one update. This is the one that I remember, but it was like every time for whatever reason, it decided to count every input as an output. So it read my microphone as a speaker, and I mean, this is the Shure SM7B. It does not have any speaker capabilities. It doesn't even have a headphone jack. I mean, like,
Wait for the microphone nerds to come in and be like, oh, but a microphone's actually a speaker? Oh, they're the same technology. Shut the fuck up. No one cares.
Well, it's just it was always weird things like that when pipeware broke.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Every single time it was like a fundamental thing that you expect has to work would break.
Yep.
And every single time, like it didn't matter. Like every update, and it was at that point I was like, you know what? I'm gonna use Debian because they're never going to get an update. You know, it's just never going to happen. You just use whatever they use. You're going to use it for the next 2 years. You're never getting an update. And if you're on a rolling release, oh, us poor souls. I mean, every single time pipeware, it was like, you know how Arch does this stupid thing where sometimes instead of sending out the stable version of a package, they'll send out the Git version instead. They do this in several. They did it with Grub for whatever reason for a long time.
Okay. Yep.
I don't know if they still do that or not. Where instead of pushing out the stable version of Grub, they're always on the Git branch. It feels like that with it felt like that with pipeware, where it felt like they were pushing out the development version of pipeware all the time, and it was like it wasn't just Arch. It was everybody. Like anybody who got the new version of pipeware, it's broke again. Like it was horrible. It was like those are dark times, dark times.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I had an issue. So you know if you're like capturing like music, for example, in like OBS, so you're capturing like a game audio, something like that. So you know how you can change the volume that you hear separate from the volume of like the game itself. So it stays consistent in OBS, but you hear something different. There was a period where my master volume is the volume it was being captured. So if I turn it up for me, it would turn it up for OBS. So I could not capture anything consistently. It was an absolute nightmare. That's what made me swap back to Pulse Audio for a couple of months, because I couldn't use it when it was like that.
It was so bad that I saw people at that time. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to use ALSA. Okay, just hold on a second. All right, we don't want to manage our audio via config file. Okay, I mean, I'm sure the NixOS users would be very happy managing it via config file, but the rest of us would like a GUI. Please, thank you.
Yeah.
I had to piss off the Nix users.
I like mentioning NixOS because people have asked me to do a NixOS video 4 years probably, and I've never done it.
Oh. I have an ongoing feud with the Nix. So it's not really a feud, really. Just there's a whole bunch of Nix users in my Discord server, and they're all awesome people. Like I'm doing a long-term review of Nix right now. I have it on the computer that's behind me on my standing desk, and on a separate hard drive and on a laptop. And it's a fine distro. It does literally everything different than a traditional Linux distro. So I have this thing. I posted a short of me and Tyler on the podcast talking, and I made this comment: NixOS is not a Linux distro.
I did see that.
And
yes.
Now everybody in my Discord that uses Nix has changed their name to NixOS is not a distro, just to troll me. So I've been trolling them back. So every time I mention NixOS, I have to mention that it's not a Linux distro, even though it technically is a Linux distro. But it does. Have you spent any time with NixOS?
My entire understanding is packages are installed through like configs or something, and like you can be like very specific about the versions of dependencies you need, and like they're separate from other dependencies. That's as much as I know.
Okay, so just as a broad overview, yes, everything's managed via config file, and it's cool that it's managed via config file. They're very proud that it's managed via config file. Like, you talk to a Nix user, they have to mention their Nix config somewhere in the conversation, but that's beside the point. the thing that's really weird about Nix is that they do like I said, they do everything differently. So if you want to find a path, like a traditional Linux path, you could name 5 of them for me right now. /bin/user local bin .local /bin, all those things. None of those things on Nix actually exist. They're not there. There's not a /user folder in the root directory of a Nix OS install. It just doesn't exist. /etc, not actually there. None of those things. If you go to cd/, there's nothing there other than your user directory, or not your user directory, your home directory. Those files do exist. They're just in the NixOS store directory, which is somewhere else.
Right.
And that's where they all look. Now, I don't know the technical details behind how they've made this work or why they made this decision, but the reason why I'm always on that it's not a traditional Linux, distro, is because of that type of thing, that those files that you'd expect to be in the root directory just aren't there. Your paths are all different, and they're almost universally controlled by Nix itself. So any of the paths that you want, so if you want to put a script inside of the path, you would put it in an entirely different place than you would on a traditional Linux distro. Or, this is where it gets even more complicated, you use something like Home Manager to manage those scripts, which is an entirely different can of words that I still don't understand to this day. Tyler's tried to explain to me Home Manager. There's several people who tried to explain it to me. I still don't really understand it. And then you have Flakes, which are an entirely different thing. It feels like whoever came up with Nix was like, you know what? I like Linux. Let's change everything about it except for the kernel and do it that way. And if that's the way that you want to do things, okay. But in my few months of actually using it, it's by far, like, I would say that Gen 2 is actually a more user-friendly distro than Nix is. And I know it sounds hilarious, but I think that it's actually true, because yes, Gen 2 is by far harder to install than Nix is, because Nix you can just use a Calamares installer and it's fine, it's installed.
Sure.
But when it comes to actually maintaining the distro, I think that Gen 2 is actually more user-friendly. Now, that's not to say that it's user-friendly at all. It's just more user-friendly than the Nix stuff is, because not only do they do everything differently, but their documentation is so bad. Like, here's another comparison. I think that the Suckless guys do documentation better than NixOS does. And the Suckless guys, they don't do documentation at all. So that's not a competition that they'd even be playing with, and yet they do documentation better than the Nix guys do. And I'm sure there's plenty of fantastic developers behind the Nix project. In fact, I know that there are, but their community needs to get on there. Like, we all proclaim loud and proud that the Arch Wiki is the best thing about Arch. The Nix Wiki, or whatever they call it, is the worst thing about NixOS. It's really, really bad. And because of all of these hot takes that I have, because NixOS has become the new thing, right? I said this in the Discord the other day, that the Linux community goes through fads just like any other community. We see this in, again, this is my third mention of Unix porn. I feel like every time I come on your podcast, I mention Unix porn more than anybody else. But we went through on Unix porn. For a long time, it was i3 was the window manager that everybody used. Then it was BSPWM, and then it was Hyperland. Right now, it seems to be Hyperland. We'll go through this over and over again. We do the same thing with distros. For the longest time, it was Arch. I mean, we all know the memes. Arch Linux, by the way, I use it. But that's gone away. It's no longer cool to use Arch because it has an install script. Goodness gracious, if it was fine when it was hard to install, but now if you have an install script,
I hate people who complain about the install script because they don't actually know the history of Arch. It literally had an install script when it first started. They deleted the install script.
Well, because it wasn't cool with an install script, Brody. You have to know this. If in order to be cool, you have to do things. Well, you have to be edgy and with it, and the way you do that is by doing things the hard way.
Sure.
But the thing now is NixOS, and several people in my Discord have mentioned that it feels like people have just used it because it started to become popular. I don't know if that's it's hard to. I mean, it's like people started using Arch because it was popular, but Arch Linux is a good Linux distribution. NixOS is also a good Linux distribution, so saying people just use it because it's popular feels wrong.
I thought you were gonna say NixOS isn't a good distro.
I would like to live and still have a YouTube channel, and I won't say that because they would literally come at me with pitchforks. But it feels wrong to say that, but it's absolutely true that a lot of people gravitated towards NixOS and Arch because it was popular, and that it's a good distro is probably a bonus for those people because it wouldn't be popular if it was bad distro. So I guess there's that way of looking at it, but. I was a distro hopper for a very long time. You only distro hop in April Fools. I don't know why that happens. Like every year he says it. I'm gonna stop using Arch. All of a sudden, what was this last year?
I'll tell you about my plan this year because I got a fun one for this time.
Oh, I hate April Fools, but I'm gonna be glad to hear it. But anyways, you're not a distro hopper. At least not anymore. I don't know if you were previously were, but I've been a distro hopper since I started using Linux in 2017. But this last July, I decided I was going to stop distro hopping, and I've challenged myself to use the same distro for 2 years. I chose OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, and this is how it's going to relate to the next conversation, because it was off the beaten path.
Right.
I didn't want to use a popular distro because, I mean, that would have not made it a challenge. I wanted to use something that was, not something that everybody used, and Tumbleweed has fit that thing, and it's so good that I have a sticker. I'm not going to move the microphone to ruin your audio, but I have a sticker on my microphone that says OpenSUSE. So I become an OpenSUSE fanboy, but that was just kind of a after effect. I chose it because it was off the beaten path. A lot of people ask me, why didn't you choose Nix? Well, first off, I didn't know anything about Nix when I made the decision, but also everybody and their brother uses Nix now. And I didn't want to be just another... I'm honestly surprised that there aren't more YouTubers out there that use Nix, to be honest with you, because a lot of the Linux YouTubers do tend to follow the crowd, because it gets a lot like Fedora did this for a while, like a couple of years ago when Fedora was like the hot shit, and like the best way to get views on YouTube was to follow that along. And if I made a Fedora video like 3 times a week, and each one of those things blew up. And it didn't matter. But then eventually people got sick of hearing about Fedora, and I that's what, like, I knew that eventually Nix was just going to become a thing that everybody was okay with, and you couldn't make content on that over and over again without, just fatigue setting in.
I've just been happy over here chilling on Arch. I'm just chilling. If I need to try out Nix stuff, I can like maybe do it, but like it'll happen at some point. I'm not guaranteeing anything, but well, I don't know. If I was gonna try out Nix, I would have to do it on a separate system. I'm not gonna do it on my main system. That's just not gonna happen.
Once you open up the door, you're gonna.
Well, I certainly wouldn't do it at the start on my main system. Maybe if I liked it, I would change my mind.
It would be interesting to see your perspective on how they do things, because it's just like I said, it's completely different than anything else that you ever tried. And I mean, unless you've used like something like Geeks or something, which is also a config-based distro, but it's just completely different, and their community is very enthusiastic.
Right.
And they once you open the door that you're going to try this thing, you're going to hear about it even after you've stopped trying about it, which is fine. Like I'm very pro fanboy. Like if you become a fanboy of something, good. I'm glad. I love that. I love OpenSUSE. I like window managers. I'm like, I can't stand as much as I say I like XFCE in Plasma. I don't want to use them. They're fine for other people. I'm a window manager guy.
Sure.
But so I like it that people can find things that they love and enjoy, because it not only keeps them happy on Linux, but also allows when they're enthusiastic, they take part in the community, they get involved in discords and Linux user groups, and they start contributing to documentation. And if they know how to code, they'll start, it's all part of the thing. If you're enthusiastic about what you enjoy, you're more likely to participate in that thing. And I think that makes open source what it is. So I make fun of the fanboys a lot of NixOS. But I'm also very happy that they are fanboys of NixOS because, without fanboys and fangirls, we wouldn't have people who are enthusiastic about literally anything. We'd just have a bunch of distro hoppers that would eventually end up on Ubuntu, and that would just be the most boring thing ever. If you, I say I'm fine with fanboys, but if you're a fanboy of Ubuntu, we have problems because I don't get it. I don't get it.
I don't know.
By the way,
yes.
I'm sorry. I just thought about this because we talked about window managers. Can we just agree? Maybe between you, me, and DT, we can get together and have like a Linux YouTuber community committee, and just all of us agree that we can stop calling these things compositors and call them window managers. We had the name. Okay, it's a window manager. It's what it is. We don't need to call it a compositor and say that's new and shiny. It's a window manager. It's Hyperland window manager. It's great. It has a compositor attached to it. We don't need to name new things all the time. It was a perfectly fine name. It's not like it's so completely different that it needed a new name. It does the same things that all the window managers all did before. Those didn't have compositors attached to them. And there's obviously a lot more technical stuff, underneath it, but they do, from a user perspective, it manages Windows. That's what it does. Let's call it a window manager. Wayland compositor just makes it more confusing. And another thing that bothers me. Sorry.
No, I get what you're saying. When I stream and the Hyperland dev's just in my chat and I call it a window manager, he was like, "Oh no, it's actually a compositor." I'm like, "I don't care. Shut up. Go back to writing code."
Excuse me, sir, but what you refer to as Linux is actually GNU/Linux, and those are the same people, by the way.
What you refer to as Wayland is actually Wayland/compositor.
Yeah,
I need to rewrite the copy. That's a good plan. I'm gonna rewrite the copy faster.
Yeah, what you're actually referring to is actually WL roots plus whatever.
Now that is an idea. I'm gonna do this.
And there are those people who that's the way that they think, and don't correct me because I'm forevermore I'm just calling it a window manager because that's exactly what it is. And just like I will refuse to call GNOME GNOME, and I'll refuse to call Linux GNU/Linux or GNU plus Linux or whatever the open source community has decided they want us to call it these days. It's just Linux, guys.
I think most people have decided it's Linux. It's just a couple of weird people. I think it's once again this is the old people that are older than you. These are the people who don't like change from the 90s.
They're the people who remember that GNU Herd actually still exists, and might actually decide that they're going to try to run it. By the way, anybody who's actually using GNU Herd, if it actually is a thing that you can use, I would like to hear from you because I want to know what that experience is actually
like. They are now working. They're working on 64-bit hardware support.
I'm sure that there's someone out there like, oh yeah, I use GNU Herd, but do you really? The fact that it's first off still around, and second of all, their website, if you go to the GNU Herd website, it actually looks a lot like the Slackware website, which makes a lot of sense if you think about it. I mean, they're both really, really old projects. They're both developed by people who are, shall we say, been around for a bit. So yeah, it's I would love to hear from because there's somebody that I heard from recently that said, well, I'm going to try GNU Herd. I don't think I've heard from that person again. So maybe they're still trying to get it to work.
Maybe it's like NixOS and it just sucks you in and you just never want to leave it.
Or Plan 9. There was a little while there where people were like, oh, let's see if we can get Plan 9 up and running on our machine. Like, first of all, let's not do that and say we did. As that doesn't sound like a good time at all. Tyler, the guy who does the podcast with me, he had Plan 9 on his machine for a week. He's never going to do that again. he said so.
I'm happy. I'm happy with Arch. I'm happy with this. Yeah, Arch is mainstream now. You have literally a hardware device being sold running a modified version of Arch.
When they made that announcement, I was like, "Why did you choose Arch?" It's like now see, it would have been less surprising if they'd chosen like Manjaro, but man, that would have pissed everybody off because nobody likes Manjaro. But it would have made like would have made sense. But basically, it makes a lot of sense because it gives them a lot of control over packages, right? It's like the reason why Chrome OS chose Gentoo, right? It gives them all the power that they want to control the packages that they choose. They can choose which direction they want to go. Do they want to go more rolling release and bring something that's a little bit more up to date, or do they want to hold things back, which is really easy to do on Arch? So it makes a lot of sense. But the initial reaction that we all had when the Steam Deck was, we're going to use Arch. Really? Arch breaks a lot. They break Grub a lot. Like that's a thing that they do. Are you sure you want to use this? But it hasn't been a problem, and the Steam Deck has just I'm not a gamer, but it has made me into more of a gamer than I ever have been before. And it's so weird. First off, these are all things that you would think that I wouldn't like. First off, I'm not an Arch guy anymore. So there's one thing. Another thing is it's immutable. Not really into the whole mutable scene. And also it uses Wayland. So you wouldn't think that would be my thing.
Wayland is what it uses to
Xorg.
launch the games.
Yeah.
It with GameScoop, but it does have the Xorg desktop.
Yeah, it has you're right, but it has all these things that you wouldn't expect me to like.
Sure.
And it is a gaming machine that, again, I'm not a gamer, but it's changed the way that I look at gaming because I knew gaming was getting pretty good on Linux over the course of the last couple of years, but because there was a certain time where I didn't know what the Steam sale actually was, and now every time a Steam sale comes up, I go, I gotta go buy some games that I'm never gonna play, but I'm gonna buy them. Like I have like 250 games in my library now.
Yeah, I know the feeling. Yep.
I have about 200 of them that I haven't played. But the thing is, that's not that right there is not a new situation. So I have over on my shelf across the way all of my Xbox games that I've ever purchased, and there's like 7 of them. It's not a lot. It's not a big library. Half of them are still in the cellophane wrapper. Never played them, and they're not like I have Batman Arkham City up there. I have Mass Effect 3. Both of them never opened. Never opened them. They're still in the wrapper.
What? Why have you not taken the wrapper off?
Well, first off, I don't know. I really don't know why I never played them. It's just okay. So
no, I get not playing them, but you buy the game and you're not like, I want to take the wrapper off of it.
All right. So the thing is with console gaming, and the thing is the Steam Deck does this way better. So it's one of the reasons why it's kind of converted me. But on consoles, I used to go months without using a console. And if you ever go months without using a console, you'll know that the first thing that makes you do is an update.
Fair enough.
And it takes. Really, PlayStation was way worse than Xbox. Xbox did it as well. I still have an Xbox. Hasn't been plugged in years. But PlayStation was really bad at this when I had a PlayStation. If you go a few weeks without playing it, you get on there like, oh, I'm ready for a gaming session. I'm gonna pawn some noobs in Call of Duty.
Sure.
Whatever. I don't even know the lingo. That's how freaking old I am. But anyways, you get on there and like you're ready for a gaming session and you have to do an update and it takes 2 hours to update because you haven't used it in forever. And apparently that's just how long it takes to update BSD. I didn't even know this, but that's just the way that it works. Apparently, I don't know, but and by the time it was done with the update, I didn't want to play anymore. So the reason why a lot of that stuff hasn't been opened or played is because I kept going these long periods of time without using it, and every time I opened it up, had an update, and by the time it was done, I was no longer interested in gaming. The Steam Deck has updates all the damn time, but it does this weird thing, and it's apparently a new technology. It updates in the background.
Yeah, it's great.
Who would have thought that would have been the thing to do? It was like, duh. Surely there's someone at Microsoft and Sony that would have thought, It's just updating the background.
Well, this is the neat thing about doing an image-based system. They can update the image, and it doesn't actually apply that update to the next reboot. So you can just keep gaming, no problem at all. And then when you're done, turn it off. It does the update when you're done. Boom, done. Who cares?
Do you think that like the next generation of consoles will take advantage of that technology?
I really hope so. I
That'd
don't know
be
why they
awesome.
haven't.
Well, maybe because there's not an immutable BSD distro.
Actually, I can understand Microsoft not doing it because the Xbox is basically just running Windows, and Windows doesn't do this.
Yeah, the NT kernel's crustier and crusty.
Yeah. I could see Sony working on something. I don't know. They'll have to obviously build all their own tooling internally, but I could certainly see it happening. I would like it to happen. It would make things a lot more convenient. But you're still going to run into that issue where, well, if you're playing an online game, you're still going to have to do that update first. So you're not going to get away from that because, you know, you got to be on the latest update to play a game on the online servers. That's understandable. But it shouldn't be an issue with a single-player game. That's for sure.
Well, I mean, even like with the PlayStation 5 and the most recent Xboxes, they're all like always on machines, kind of like laptops. Is there something preventing them from just doing the updates while I'm not around? Like
you actually can have the update. There is a setting you can enable. I think by default it doesn't have it enabled, but there's a setting that can be enabled, at least on the PlayStation, where it will download the updates when you're not using the machine.
That would have made me much more happy. You got to remember that when I was using consoles, they still had discs, and that's not really not really how they do things anymore. I mean, you can still get one. But
I have a disc PS5, but I would not be surprised if the next gen doesn't have a disc, or if the disc version is their second-class citizen.
Or you have to get like a $300 external optical drive.
That has been discussed as well. Yeah.
That you would. Of course, you could only use it with that console. You couldn't plug it into it has a proprietary connector or something.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely something that's going to happen. Still not going to be a console gamer though. The Steam Deck is good. It's just a good device. But I haven't. You got the OLED because you're Mr. Hot YouTuber Linux guy. Did you try the original and were able to compare the two, or did you just have the second one?
I've not tried the original now. I've only used the second one, and the second one's great. Yeah, it's great.
Something tells me someone doesn't use their Steam Deck very much.
I use it. I usually game on the weekend, so I don't game that much. Yeah, and there are certain games I like to play on the Steam Deck, but I've also been playing a lot of Path of Exile recently, and that's been taking up too much of my gaming time. And you can play Path of Exile with a controller, but I don't. I play keyboard and mouse, so I've been playing that on my desktop. So the Steam Deck hasn't been turned on in a little bit. But I've also started playing Monster Hunter, so I might play some Monster Hunter on the Steam Deck.
So what I'm constantly surprised at is the different levels of experience in gaming you have compared to the Steam Deck and regular Linux.
Sure.
And it's a little worrying because it kind of gives this whole stratification of Linux is good at gaming now, but is it? I mean, it is if you know what you're doing and what packages to download and what version of Proton you need, and if you know how to change a version of Proton. If you're using it on desktop Linux, you kind of have to deal with that kind of stuff, and every once in a while there's a workaround that you have to do. On the Steam Deck, they've come up with all this magic that just seems to make games play like it was a Windows machine. Like the example that I have most recently is Madden. Right, Madden is one of those games that I used to play a lot when I was a console gamer, and EA has this pass that you can buy on Steam. It's like $25 a year, and you get access to all these games. Now, granted, 95% of them don't play well on regular Linux, but for whatever reason, they play fantastically well on the Steam Deck. Like all of them. Like you can play the Sims on there, which, I mean, if you're still into The Sims, I suppose. You can, some of the old SimCity games are on there, again, for nostalgia purposes. That was kind of cool. Madden is on there. Star Wars Battlefront games were on there. A whole bunch of games worked fantastically well on the Steam Deck, where they didn't work at all no matter what version of Proton I was using on the regular desktop that I use. The same, and it's not even just the EA stuff. The like Forza Horizon 5, I bought that because I used to be big on racing games, and I thought, well, maybe I could get back into it a little bit, and it would not work on the computer in front of me. Worked fantastically well on the Steam Deck. Now you could have cooked an egg on it because it got really freaking hot, but it played really well. I mean, I'm not a frames per second guy, so I don't really care. As long as it's not stuttering, I can play just fine.
Right.
And that barrier where it works really well there, and it doesn't work as well on regular Linux does worry me a little bit, because if the Steam Deck were to draw in more people to use Linux, they wouldn't have the same experience in both places, without some knowledge at least to get it to be similar.
I think in most cases, desktop Linux, it's gotten really good. That's the thing. It's gotten really, really good recently. I have not run into a game in like a good while where I've actually had to go and do some additional things. NVIDIA, yes, there are some additional things sometimes, but at least in my experience, maybe I need to change a Proton version, and that's, that obviously that is kind of annoying to have to do, but that's about as much as I've had to do. Yeah, I can't really comment on this because my experience has been basically perfect for a while now.
I think that's just that I play some of the weird older games, and some of the older games aren't quite there. But some of the newer games, like Forza's a newer game that didn't do well. But the thing that surprised me, blew my mind, that Halo, the Halo Master Chief Collection works very well on every Linux that I've played it on. Even my crappy Intel integrated graphics laptop will play the Halo that's on Steam. Yes, those are older games, but that's awesome, and it makes me happy. I'm not much of a gamer, but I do like it that, it does feel like, unless your game has hardcore anti-cheat, the guys hate Linux type of thing, everything else just kind of works. Now, unless you're having my experience where for whatever reason the EA stuff just, maybe it's also possible that I did something wrong, because that's my MO. But it's very reasonable just to say that that's my experience, because I have something weird, or maybe OpenSUSE doesn't handle it well or whatever. So, but overall, yeah, gaming is just. I would argue, and I might make a video about this actually, that Steam and Proton is the best thing that's ever happened to Linux, ever. And even if you're not a gamer, you have to acknowledge that people being able to game on Linux, even if you don't want it to become the next Windows, being able to do that and do it well with games that actually matter is an important thing. But also, all of that technology that goes towards getting games to run goes towards making things like Wayland work better. One of the reasons why so much effort has gone into Wayland is because they want to get the games to work. So if gaming wasn't such a thing that has kind of happened on Linux, maybe we wouldn't have as much development work on that kind of thing, because there wouldn't be that urgency to get Xorg applications that are never going to get transferred to Wayland to work on Wayland. So I think that the Valve's efforts on making gaming work on Linux, which I'm sure there were, that was not an altruistic thing that they did.
Oh no, they were terrified of the Windows Store. That's why they originally did it.
Yeah, so the fact that they have put in this effort, and not only that, but they have embraced open source unlike any other multi-billion-dollar corporation really ever has. They open source the entire part, basically everything to do with the Steam Deck is a lot of that stuff is very much open source, that you can go download the schematics and stuff is online and stuff. Granted, it's licensed in certain ways and whatever, and there's rules, but they have they've embraced it and they've taken part in the community and they contribute to things like collab. It starts with a C. That's the one that kind of like behind wine. What is the
Um,
It's not Collabora. That's the
no,
offer
no, I
software.
know. I know who you're talking. Code Weavers.
Code Weavers. I knew it started with a C. I should give credit for that, partial credit. But anyways, they work a lot with them. They work a lot with the wine project, all of this stuff, and not only that, but they like they support KDE. They give money to the plasma the organization and stuff like that. I don't know if they've given to GNOME or not. Probably not. I mean, why would they? But they do all this stuff, and I think that is important, and it all filters down, even if you're not a gamer, to making Linux such a much better experience today than it was even 3 or 4 years ago. And I think that that's fantastic. And I'm very, very excited for where all this stuff. I know I've spent the last 2 hours bitching about every single thing that's changing in Linux. It's changing on from underneath me. I've said I don't want to go to Wayland because it's change. I hate change. But on the other hand, I am still very excited for where Linux is going, and I'm glad I'm going to hopefully be around to see it as it goes on, because things have got. Linux was pretty good in 2017 when I started using it. It's way better now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess we can talk about what this is a part that a lot of people have a lot of opinions on, but the fracturing of Xorg into what we now consider these individual Wayland compositors, Wayland window managers, where they're their own. Basically, the entire display stack is each individual project. So Hyperland is its own stack, Sway is its own stack, Cosmic is going to be its own stack. Obviously, you still have these shared libraries, like WLRoot is a shared library that Hyperland uses, Sway uses, so on and so forth. Things that use Smithy, things that use Mutter, like, I guess Mutter pretty much only GNOME uses it, but for the most part, each individual desktop has to implement their own display stack. You don't just have this Xorg thing where you can just focus on the window management component, the extra things you want to do, the status bars, things like that. Now you have to do the entire thing. And for big desktops like KDE and GNOME, and I think this is a big part of the reason why we don't see more. For big desktops like KDE and GNOME, doing this, obviously it took time, it took money, it took development effort. They got it done. And the smaller desktop environments like Budgie, they're getting close. Cinnamon, they have experimental support. There's another one recently that had experimental support. But what do you think about this fracturing? Because I know there actually is there was a GitLab issue a long time ago. I believe it's Wayland 233. Wayland 233, which was basically, let's make a Xorg equivalent on Wayland. What do you think about the direction we're going? And do you think this is for the best? Do you think there are some concerns here? Like, what are you gonna say about it?
Okay, so I think that this is the way Linux does things. It's the way it's always done things. Okay, so when they wanted to create a different init system and init setup, there was multiple different ways of doing it, right? There was multiple different projects. When everybody decided that Xorg was old and crusty, which has been old and crusty for basically my entire life, right? There was multiple projects in different directions that they were going. There was Mirror, and there was, Wayland it's doing its own thing, and there was a couple other things, and we didn't really know where things were going to go. Eventually, Wayland won. We've done it with package formats, and nothing's ever really won in package formats. And the fact that it's so fractured, we have 12,000 different package managers is just on an offshoot. It feels like the package manager is kind of like that developer's first programming project that they have in university, where it's like a to-do list or calendar application. You get you get your teething done on a package manager. That's why there's so many of them, but that's beside the point. I think that's just the way that Linux does things, and then eventually something will come along like systemd that will be more of a standard. Yes, there'll be a whole bunch of smaller offshoots that do things a little bit differently, but eventually something will come along that will be more standard. And usually that's the thing that Red Hat backs. Whatever way Red Hat does things, that will be the way it ends up being. But the Wayland thing is weird, right? Because there's so many different small components. Wayland is actually kind of like System D if you think about it. System D is not just one thing; it's many different things that go along, and it's all called System D.
Sure.
Right? Wayland is kind of the same thing. Yes, there's a thing called Wayland, but you're not just going to use just Wayland. You have to use all these other things. You have to have X Wayland. You have to have, if you're gonna use WL roots, all the stuff that goes along with it. If you're going to create a composite or whatever, it's all a combined thing that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem I see with the way Wayland does things, or the Wayland situation such as it is that it's going to be really, from a user perspective, at least, it's going to be really hard for those of us who switch between things. If you just use GNOME, you're going to be golden, right? Or if you just use Plasma, or even if you just use Hyperland, you're going to be fine. But if you rotate between window managers, you're going to be in a world of hurt, because you're going to, just from a portal perspective, none of them use the same portal.
Well, the WL Roots ones do use the same portal except Hyperland.
Right, well, granted, it's not as if you're going to be switching between 5 or 6 of them. There's only like 2 of them that you're going to switch between. But as of right now, there's only really 2.
Sure, they could implement their own portals, that's for sure.
And they probably will, because they're all going to want to do things slightly different. And it seems like portals are the place where a lot of that innovation and workarounds for using things like global shortcuts is actually going to happen, right? That's what portals are for, and that's where a lot of the things that you kind of have to do to get things to work, kind of like Xorg has to go into that thing. And if you want to create your own compositor, you're probably going to be putting a lot of effort into a portal of some kind. And if it's different, and then people rotate between different compositors, window managers, they're going to have a big problem, because they're gonna have to switch portals. And here's the thing: is like one of my favorite things about OpenSUSE. It's gonna be really, really niche, but with OpenSUSE, they'll let you have multiple portals installed at the same time. It does a really good job of managing those services, so that it knows that if you're in, say, Hyperland, you're going to need the portal for Hyperland, or if you're in Xorg, you're gonna need what that needs. And if you're in KDE, Plasma, whatever, it does a good job of switching back and forth. Like if you're on Fedora, though, Fedora will not let you have 2 of the same installed at the same time.
Right.
It just won't let you do it. It says, if you're installing the Hyperland portal and you have the KDE portal installed, it'll force you to uninstall the KDE portal before it'll run the install the Hyperland one. Right. That's just the way that it is. And so switching back and forth, if you're a hopper, you're going to be probably in a little bit of trouble. But the thing is, here's another problem from my perspective. I'm one of those things where I'm very cognizant of, this is a flaw of mine, that I see everybody as a distro hopper or a window manager hopper, but very few people are much more like you, Brody, than they're like me. Okay. You stay on the same thing for ages and ages. You're very happy with Arch. I'm a distro hopper at heart, so I like to hop around. I'm also that way with window managers. I right at the moment, let's just go through this. I have KDE installed. I have Hyperland. I have OpenBox. I have Qtile, BSPWM, DWM, River. I'm forgetting at least 3 or 4 of them. I have all these installed on the same machine, okay? And I use them, okay? I hop between them. I've used 3 different window managers today, okay? Now, granted, a lot of that was just because I was messing around with Hyperland, and because, as you do, you break things along the way, so I had to go into something that was working in order to do things, and it was just easier to use a graphical environment than use the TTY, but that's beside the point. I do switch between these things because my ADD happens a lot, and I like to switch between them, but I have to remember that not everybody is that way, because I don't think anybody is that way, except for me. It's just the way that I do it. But I think that when it comes to the fracturing thing, is that for people like me, if there are any others like that, they're going to have a hard time. And I also, it make from not a developer, but it feels like it's eventually going to cause some problems when it comes to development um, of the smaller projects because they're going you're actually it's already causing problems. So Xmonad's trying to go to Wayland, but the developers who do Xmonad have no clue how to do it. Right? They've basically blatantly said that they don't know how to do a Wayland version of Xmonad, so they're hiring somebody to do it. And one of the reasons why they don't know how is because there's so many ways to do it. I mean, that has to be one of the ways, one of the reasons why, because they could choose WL roots. They could choose one of the other options that exist. They could build their own thing. And once they choose the thing that they're going to use, they also have to figure out how they're going to get the rest of their code base transition to that thing there. And that's not easy at all. And if they could come across, I pick on the budget guys a lot because they like to change their mind a ton, right? You know, they were going to go to Qt for a while, and then they're going to go to they scrapped that, they're going to go back to GTK4, and then they're going to do the ICE thing. Now they've decided they're not going to do the ICE thing now. I don't even know what they're going to do now. They changed their minds a lot, and I think that the Xmonad guys have the tendency, not the tendency, but the possibility of having a problem like that because they could go down the road of doing WL roots or whatever. If they choose WL roots and find out halfway through that, oh my God, this thing just does not work the way that we want it to work. So we're going to have to start all over again and do the thing again. And because there's so many different changes, so many different options out there for this, they could go move from thing to thing and just eventually decide that no, none of this stuff actually works the way we want it, and then we have to start over, build it all from the stuff. It's just a mess of epic proportions waiting to happen, but it's only going to matter to Window Manager people because everybody else uses GNOME or Plasma. I mean, for the GNOME and KDE are going to do their things, and it's going to work fine. KDE will be buggy, GNOME will be GNOME, and the vast majority of people are going to use those two things. And the fragmentation, such as we see it as, nerds, isn't going to matter to 99% of the people. Even 99% of the developers aren't going to care all that much. It's all that stuff has to do with the compositors themselves, the window managers. And as much as I would like to see everyone use a window manager because they're functionally superior to any desktop environment out there, I will fight anybody who says otherwise. And I will win that fight. I will take up that banner and I will win that fight. But unfortunately, not everybody does use a window manager. And for the most part, because everybody's going to use GNOME or KDE, the fractional stuff, the fragmented stuff that goes behind the scenes isn't going to matter all that much other than to a few developers. But again, I do think that eventually, like, WL roots seems to be like the thing for the most part that people are going to center around. Whether that's a good thing or not is another conversation because it has so many issues. Also, I don't know if this is just my sense or not, but it feels like the main developers behind WL roots it feels like they took some of the GNOME juice in some ways where they are very finicky about making certain changes that they don't agree with. And if they don't do things in their way, I think it's one of the reasons why there's forks of WL roots all over the place because it's really hard if you and I can remember, not a developer, but if you make a change to WL roots and then try to get it implemented into the project, and either you do it the wrong way or they just really don't agree with what you're trying to add, you have no chance. It's kind of like there's a VTE, VTI technology or whatever that goes into a lot of GNOME terminals and stuff. The developers behind that are very anti-change. Yeah, that's it. And they, for a while there, that's one of the reasons why, like, Termite, the Termite, this is like really super nerdy stuff, but they stopped developing the Termite terminal because they couldn't interact with those developers anymore. If WL Roots feels like that sometimes, from some of the stories that I've heard, I don't know if that's across the board or if it's just like small instances or what. You probably would know that better than I would, but it just feels like we're going to center around WL roots in the compositor land for probably forever, and that's going to be the thing. And maybe or maybe not, that would be a good or bad thing. I'm not exactly well knowledged enough to know it.
I did mention earlier that Simon Sir, which is the guy that took over the WL Roots project after Drew DeVault left, it did take about 2 years to convince him that letting screen tearing happen, if people choose for it to happen, might actually be a good thing. So there are definitely instances where he will drag his feet for a really, really long time for something he disagrees with. Most of the time, WL Roots is a lot more willing to play ball. Like, if KDE has a thing they want to do, if Gnome has a thing they want to do, usually WL Roots is good to be like, okay, we'll just add this as an option. And it's especially so over the past 2 or 3 years, as is often the case with a lot of things in the Wayland space. But traditionally, yes, that has been an issue in some circumstances. There are still issues where... Obviously, there's still issues where there is some disagreement. So the big problem I have with Wayland is it is peak design by committee. So you have 20 different people, all with different requirements, all suggesting different ideas. And a lot of those ideas do not play well with each other. So, yeah, things collapse sometimes.
And you end up with a lot of forks when people have to go off and do the things that they wanted to do it that way. So they're going to fork this thing and do it their way. And they don't always, compatible. And, that's just, it's the way of things. Especially, it's going to be even more the way of things with compositors because there's not a gigantic corporation out there that's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to the compositor space. Now, WL Roots has a lot of ties in with KDE and GNOME and stuff like that, so they're going to be more influenced with, the money makers of the world than Xmonad or DWM is ever going to be. But you still have a lot of people with fingers in that pie that don't necessarily always have that type of influence, and it's going to be very fascinating over the next few years because. Just to bring it all back, we talked there for a while how there's not a lot of choices when it comes to window managers in the Wayland space, and one of the reasons why I'm more hopeful now, even though that's still true, is because I do think that as Wayland ramps up, and it's still, even though it's like I said, he's 15 years old, it doesn't feel like it should be ramping up. It feels like it should be like we should have a ton of window managers, right? Because it's been around forever, but it's really only usable now. Like, it took 15 years for you actually be able to use it. And I think now that that's true, that people like me can actually use Wayland for things, as that becomes more and more true for more and more people, they're going to look at Hyperland like, oh, that's really cool. I know some Python, I know some Rust or whatever, I know Nim. I can go, play around with that language, make myself a compositor, and as that goes on, as time goes on, we'll see the selection that we had with Xorg for the last 30 years. Like i3 has been around for 25 years or whatever it's been around for a very long time. XFC has been around for what, I don't want to mention XFC. I mean, Xmonad has been around for a long time. DW has been around for a long time. It's just going to, now that it's usable, as time goes on, the selection will get there, I think. But because it's so fragmented, unlike with Xorg window managers, where really, when you're making that choice, you're making your choice between two things. Do you want dynamic or manual? And which programming language or configuration language do you want to choose? Well, there's going to be a third choice there when you're talking about Wayland. What compositor is going to be underneath that thing, and does it do the things that I want it to do? So, and then maybe be a fourth thing: does it use the portal that I'm going to need in order to do the things that I need to do? So, it's going to be a more complicated choice because there's more things to do, more things to take into account when you're making that choice. It's not just manual or dynamic. It's not just does it have the configuration file syntax that I want it to have. It's going to be a couple extra things, and I think from a user perspective, that's going to take a little bit of time to become apparent, because right now there's only two really that you would choose from. And as that selection widens, those choices will become a little bit more difficult. But, and this is another thing, window managers are for nerds. We make choices. So I guess, I mean, we talk about the new user window manager. Come on. New users aren't using window managers. They're using GNOME. They're using KDE Plasma. You know, if you're going to use a window manager, you got some nerd in you, and you're going to be able to figure out what a portal is. Do I need to make the choice between what portal? You'll be able to understand at least somewhat if something uses WL roots or something different, and what that means for you and your gaming experience or whatever. You know, so you're going to be able to make those choices much better than, you know, random brand new Linux user ever would, because they're not going to make that choice. They're not going to have to, because they're, again, going to be using GNOME. They're going to be using Plasma, and those choices have been made for them. So that's where I'm at on all of it.
Well, that's as good a note as any to end off the show. You'll just get into the 2 hour mark right now. So yeah, let people know where they can find you.
Oh, I'm on, obviously, YouTube, youtube.com/LinuxCast. Also, just to pimp it out just a little bit, I've mentioned it a couple times, but I have a Discord server. It is awesome, but twice a month now we're doing Linux user groups on my Discord server. So those are in the events of my Discord as well, if you want to check those out. Basically, just a bunch of nerds, open to everybody. We get around in one of the voice chats and just nerd out about Linux for a couple hours. And I do one at the beginning of the month, in the morning, and one at the end of the month towards the evening. That way I can catch the most time zones as possible. And the first one was spectacular. We talked about everything from AI to Wayland. We talked a lot about Wayland because, of course, we did. We also talked about NixOS for a long time, and I got into a lot of trouble because I said it was in the Linux distro. So, yeah. Anyways, that's where you can find me. YouTube and Discord is where I hang out.
Fair enough. Anything else you want to mention?
Nope. Other than Tech Over Tea is an awesome podcast, and you should subscribe to it. It's a very good podcast. Brody has made it because he's had some of the guests you've had on over the course of the last few months. It's just, I mean, at one point you were just, you know, you had some guys on, you had DT on at one point, but lately, star after star, and then you have some random Linux YouTuber on like me. One of these things is not like the other.
So they'll be out by the time that this comes out, but you haven't seen them yet. This is following Matthew Command on. That one just came out the other day. That's the guy who made Lutris. Then I had the Primogen on. And then the week after that, I had Carl Rochelle on, the System 76 CEO. So you're following that.
Well, now we come down in the world just a little bit. You're coming. I mean, just a little bit. I don't really. First off, the most hilarious part is that the Primogen reacted to one of my videos. That was the day.
Mm-hmm. He was gonna do one of mine, and then his audio died, and he never went back and watched it.
Like when he knows who you are, that's when you know you've arrived.
It's
so, like the Vim guy.
Yeah, no, I hear him talk about Vim, like, I don't know what you're saying, man. I use Vim, but I don't use Vim like he uses Vim.
No, it's an entirely different alien right there. He's really very talented at using Vim. Magic wizard.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. As for me, my Linux stuff is on YouTube at Brody Robertson. I do videos there 6-ish days a week. Check it out. I've got the gaming channel, Brody on Games. Right now, probably still playing Through the World Ends With You and Neptunia, so check that out. There's also clips there if you want to see shorts for some reason. And if you're listening to the audio version of this, you can find the video version on YouTube at Tech Over Tea. If you are watching the video and you want to find the audio, go to your favorite podcast platform, search Tech Over Tea, and you will find it. Yeah. Give the final word. What do you want to say?
Wayland sucks. Use Xorg.
Very true. See you guys later.